This is the Let's Talk Bitcoin podcast wrap-up of the Inside Bitcoin's New York City event. I am Stephanie, of course, and I've got with me Jonathan Mohan and Sneak Jeffrey Paul. And hi, guys. Thanks so much for joining me.
Well, thanks for inviting me. It's I made it here last minute for this conference, and I'm really excited to be here. It's so much larger than every other Bitcoin conference I've ever been to. It's really amazing to me.
Yeah, it's always fun to get on.
Yeah, you guys have both been on the show before, so I think people know you. But, just in case anyone's meeting you for the first time, Jonathan, you are the organizer of the Bitcoin NYC meetups. Yeah. And you can introduce yourself if you want to.
Yeah, so I do a meetup group for New York, which we've had 57 meetups in 12 months. So that says as it relates to our activity. And I also am the New York representative for Ethereum. So any hate or love can come my way for that.
Cool. And should I call you Jeffrey or Sneak?
You can call me Jeffrey. That's totally fine. Okay. All computer hackers have to have two names. Mm-hmm. They have their name that goes on the indictment, and then they have their name that they use on the internet.
Right.
So I'm excited to be out here. My role in Bitcoin is really a lot. Pretty much as an observer. As I got into Bitcoin through the cryptography side of things. I've been a hacker and whatnot for years. And I started talking about it years ago when no one was listening. And now it's cool because now everyone is listening. And it's really exciting to see huge conferences going down that would not have been possible even 12 months ago. Being at San Jose last year and kind of getting this feel that Bitcoin is about to explode. This is the last time we're going to know everyone in this room. And then coming here and suddenly not knowing anyone in the room. It was, we knew it was coming, but now this 2014 is really an incredible year for Bitcoin. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about that, actually. I think that's a perfect way to lead into the discussion about this conference. It was big. It was at a large space. They definitely had a venue where there was plenty of room to expand.
Yeah, it's actually the Javits Center, which is where Comic-Con and just pretty much any major trade show in New York City is held there. Mm-hmm. Now, granted, it was in a very tiny part of the Javits Center, but just that it's in there alone, that's like the Carnegie Hall of conferencing. So it's pretty
surprised me a lot when I saw that.
There was a big billboard outside that kept, flashing the signs for different events that were going on, and just seeing Inside Bitcoin up in lights, was pretty cool because a lot of people pass by that.
It was on buses too.
All of my friends in New York City who have known me for years have heard me, this crank talking about internet money for years and years, and suddenly it's on buses everywhere, and I've got like 4 or 5 like camera phone shots of it just in the last couple of weeks. Like, hey, this Bitcoin thing you've been talking about, it's at the Javits. And so it was a wake up call for me.
Right. So Media Bistro really does know how to put on an event that gets a lot of press. We saw a lot of mainstream media, just like their event last year. They had another event in New York City that was very well attended by sort of mainstream press. This year, we saw tons of investors and VCs, of course, as I think we're expecting for an event like this. But you said, Jeffrey, that you didn't know a lot of the faces there, and you were surprised about that. Can you talk a little bit more?
Well, I knew that Bitcoin was expanding in terms of just mind share, forgetting about the actual currency itself, but just the mind share. People who know about it, people who talk about it, people who have even a fundamental understanding. And obviously every year it gets bigger, but it's the rate at which people have been learning about it has been growing, I think. There was one of the Let's Talk Bitcoins from January, I think it was. 2014 is going to be the year of Bitcoin, and that's absolutely true. This is going to become the year that everyone, even if they don't understand Bitcoin, knows what it is. Right. And walking into a giant hall, and yes, like you said, it's a small section of the hall, but walking into a giant hall, seeing it on buses, and walking into this room where there are these people just milling around, and it took me 10 minutes before I found one face I knew. And every other Bitcoin event I've ever been to, I find 3 people in the first 30 seconds. This time it was, I was lost in a sea. And this really just shows how much business interest there is, how much economic interest there is from the academic side of things, economists and policymakers and regulators, and then also just entrepreneurs and programmers and engineers and people building new companies and new services in the ecosystem. It's really exciting right now.
Which is, there's actually a book that I'd recommend everyone check out, which is Crossing the Chasm, which essentially it's a seminal work on how technology gets adopted and the phases of adoption. And one of my favorite talks was this guy, I think it was a DEF CON talk, where he brings out the booklet. And the booklet was every single person who was on the internet. It was like 80 names, and it included their phone number, their full name, and their home address. And that was the internet. And so when you're talking about how you couldn't see anything...
before the internet even existed.
I mean, that's what the internet was. And as we see Bitcoin go through the same process, we're seeing exactly the same thing. And I think sort of a consequence of that is sort of the what they focused on at their conference. So, it's sort of an interesting thing to see what the Texas conference focused on, and the difference between a community-driven media event versus when industry does it and how they approach it. So I think we were talking before, how surprised you were, happy, yay, that it was very regulatory focused.
I was not happy about that. But that's a good segue in to talk about that. There was, I think, a huge focus on regulation, even on the panel that I was on, which was called Bitcoin Remittances in the Developing World. I thought that was going to be like one of the panels that was more human interest and more humanitarian focused. But even on that panel, most of the panelists were talking about regulations. And to me, it struck me really odd, because that's not the focus of a panel about like micro lending and remittances. Yeah. I mean, the focus is on the people who need money, right?
I think the flip side of that coin is that it has to focus on the people who are building these systems and subject to national laws. As the sphere of Bitcoin's influence grows, we can't help but have regulators who traditionally move very, very slowly. They're starting to come into the fold. There's been enough press about Bitcoin. And these people are not stupid. We might not like what they do sometimes, but they're not stupid, and they're hearing about this. And anything that we do, especially humanitarian efforts, are going to have to, it would be a shame to build something that allows micro-lending or something that actually helps people and changes people's lives, and then have the regulators come in and say, well, you didn't cross this T or you didn't dot this I, we're going to shut you down. That'd be a tragedy. And so if we're going to do it in America, we have to kind of...
I disagree with that, because there are so many things that you can do with Bitcoin that just can't be regulated. They take place on a peer-to-peer, totally decentralized in a decentralized way, and regulations just don't really matter to those kind of things.
Well, if you look at Andreessen, he was on a talk, and he said, hey, look, what we're seeing in Bitcoin is the maturation of an industry. What that means is the fringe elements. Once it matures, you get more and more people, and Bitcoin becomes less and less fringe, and then the people who were fringe go on to the next fringe thing. So, that what you might be experiencing is just the selling out or the maturation of the space. And I actually think that as it relates to Bitcoin, I don't think Bitcoin's going to be the thing we wanted it to be from the visionary standpoint, from the change the world sort of standpoint. I actually think that, these ideas of smart contracts and that DAOs and DACs, that those are the things I think that will be non-regulatable, because they have regulation internal to the system. Mm-hmm. I think this niche, this idea of regulating something, regulating a system is needed, and Bitcoin doesn't have that internal to itself. So when Mastercoin comes online, I think it could do that for Bitcoin. But, insofar as that Mastercoin or is it now Bitcoin, I really think that the idea of regulation needs to be there, but that I don't think we need government regulators doing it. I think we could do it internal. But I don't think once we do that,
But they don't think you can do it.
If only government regulators agreed with you.
Yeah.
Right.
Just as a business person, you look at the environment in America, and I've spoken with a few people in the federal government about Bitcoin recently, and the idea that it can just be Wild West, even if it's not. Let's say Bitcoin had features that allowed it to continue being like that. The regulators are not willing to accept that. And honestly, Bitcoin lacks, it doesn't have quite the completely anonymous nature that a lot of people thought it did, and it can be regulated in the U.S. as we've seen, and I think that's going to continue whether we like it or not. So, just from a business standpoint or even a humanitarian standpoint, we have to figure out how to coexist with regulation in the U.S.
Well, I look at it in terms of how can I do a business in it, mm-hmm. And Andres explicitly states, I'm going to talk about this space, but I'm not going to be doing a business in it, because those are the people they go after. And that's exactly why you see regulators and entrepreneurs interested in that discussion, because when you say regulation, you're not talking regulation. What you're talking about is, liability reduction. Like what can I do? How do I need to dance as a monkey? So that the government won't throw me in jail. So I think when you see the house packed, what you're actually seeing is the interest in Bitcoin. And insofar as they don't want to go to jail, they have to listen to this guy talk.
But let's be honest about that. I mean, nobody really says that. They're all doing this song and dance and saying, "Oh, it's for the protection of the consumer. This Bitcoin thing is too dangerous for you, and it's for your own good." Well, I mean, that's just crap.
I forgot. I think it was not to get too deep. I think it was Nietzsche or somebody. It's like the slave morality, which is when your environment forces you into something that you didn't get to choose, you then make a virtue out of it culturally and turn it into a positive. So, for instance, this notion of Americans or New Yorkers as greedy, whereas I was talking to a European and he said, hey, look, we see that as you get one job, you do it, you're the best you do. And I said, well, how much of that is an extension of you having social programs that don't need you to worry about wants in the same way that we do as New Yorkers, and how much of that as New Yorkers, the extension to which like we can achieve our dreams here, whereas like we don't need to be satiated by just being an amazing butcher or an amazing nutritionist or plumber. Like we could actually change the world by being here. So it's like sometimes it's the cart leading the horse, where it's sometimes it's the environment that you then are forced into that you make a virtue out of. So I think these people, these entrepreneurs, don't even realize that they're a slave to the system, or they do. But, in order to see themselves in the mirror and sort of face it, that they need to make a virtue out of it rather than a vice, because that's how they can deal with it.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you there that people do often make virtues out of things that aren't virtues and that they have no control over, just to get by. But a lot of the moral support that people give stuff like regulation, they don't have to be giving it that moral support. There are
ways to protect consumers without getting government thugs involved. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, of course, absolutely. But I mean, some of the reason that, take taxes, for instance. The IRS doesn't have the manpower to go and audit everyone's tax return and track every single dollar you spend and make sure you're reporting every piece of taxable income. And, the reason that they get so much tax revenue is because people obediently and dutifully file and report it. So much of their power is just in people's minds. And so when people lend legitimacy to the concept of let's try to regulate this wild Bitcoin, and even the words that we use are important, like trust and legitimacy and fringe, like you said before. You hear a lot of that vocabulary at conferences like this. That's all like optional. We don't need to be using those words. Bitcoin is already legitimate. And we don't need like trust this person, because Bitcoin is designed so that you don't need trust. Like it's a trustless, decentralized system. So why are we talking about bringing legitimacy to it? It already has legitimacy.
Well, I think that kind of ignores one thing, is that Bitcoin exists in a vacuum. And this idea that the government has authority in a lot of cases only in people's minds, not in practice. But I mean, Bitcoin only has value in people's minds. And for Bitcoin to have value for most people who use cryptocurrencies in the economic state of the earth in the next couple decades have never used them today. And
although I would also like to say that the intrinsic value argument infuriates me to no end, because value only has value in people's mind.
I would like to see the subjective theory.
I would like to see some food or some gold with no humans on the planet, and then you argue to me how much value that has.
Certainly, the subjective theory of value is the one I subscribe to, and everybody has their own. But I think that this idea that it only has power in their minds, or only has value in their minds, is an important one that we need to pay attention to. So most people that are using cryptocurrency, 5 or 10 years from today, which will be, I think, most people on the planet, is certainly 10 years out. Most people on the planet will be using some sort of decentralized cryptocurrency. To get to that point, right now, Bitcoin exists in a vacuum. You can't get in or out of it without touching some business, whether it's a person on a street corner that you meet, or whether it's an exchange on a website that you sign up with. And those people have real considerations as far as their businesses and things like that. And so that's something that we really need to pay attention to. We can't just say like Bitcoin doesn't matter, or rather that regulation doesn't matter, because it does matter to the people that are going to be using these things.
It does. I agree. And it matters, and it affects businesses. Absolutely. But I'm saying that there are some parts of the Bitcoin ecosystem that don't have to care and that don't have to worry about it so much.
Right.
And that I think people give regulation and government like way more power than it actually has because they believe in its power. You know what I mean? It's the subjective theory of power.
It's a good one.
But you got to free your mind, you know? And I don't know. You go to a conference like this and you see some people who, like, their talks really excite me, you know, like they're talking about the future and they're talking about ideas and they're talking about like how Bitcoin is going to change the world and technologies that are built on top of it and blockchains and stuff that's like Bitcoin is going to change the world. That's the exciting thing. I don't really, you know, get excited about legal Bitcoin stuff.
That there are going to be rocks on that path to that world. And my focus right now is making it as safe and easy as possible for people to not trip over those rocks on the way between the system we have now, which is essentially total government control, to total popular control, where people individually can control their monetary future. And
sometimes you don't have to worry about tripping on the rocks if you just go around them. I know we're like taking this metaphor way too far, but
I see in the
it's
short,
like a river, you know.
In the short term, I see most people who don't necessarily have our ideological attitude, where they're willing to maybe make sacrifices or be inconvenienced to go around the rocks. But I think a lot of people just don't care about these things, and they might want to use them. And if their life is made, like people who are using Mt. Gox, a perfect example, those people would have been benefited by regulation because maybe they wouldn't have lost money that was important to them. And whether or not you think the regulation is a good or bad thing, in this one case, it may have actually saved some people some money.
That's also unseen. There's an unseen part of that too, because who would have been hurt?
It would cost other people,
other,
certainly.
Yeah, by regulation.
But I also think that it's also sort of a crock of poop. It was because of the regulation, and by that I mean the lack of, which is to say we'll throw you in jail no matter what you do, in New York and in America, that prevented American companies from going online, that made Mt. Gox. Trade Hill had 3 implementations, 4 if you count, I forget how you count them, where they were compliant each and every freaking time. Mm-hmm. And if you look at every single time they did it, the last time they actually had a credit union, they actually had it working. Trade Hill worked for 3 days. And then the federal government called the credit union and scared them into closing their account. So if you're saying that regulations, you know, if we had better regulations or we had regulations, Mt. Gox wouldn't happen. I say that it was the regulators who caused Mt. Gox to happen, because I can list, you know, more companies than I have fingers on my hands that would have been online and operating and doing way more volume than Mt. Gox would have, and were trustworthy and wouldn't have done that massive scam.
CryptoKit is the world's first Chrome browser Bitcoin wallet. It's the easiest, fastest Bitcoin wallet payment system. With a simple one-click install, it takes just seconds to get your wallet set up. And because CryptoKit finds the address and payment for you, there's no more fussing around or tab switching. CryptoKit is more than just a wallet. It comes with a preloaded PGP encrypted social network, news feeds from Reddit and Google, and up-to-date charts from exchanges. Finally, CryptoKit Directory allows you to make 2-click payments with any of the BitPay merchants. Once you install CryptoKit, you won't need anything else. For more information or to download CryptoKit, visit CryptoKit.com.